Hey guys, Techify, and today I've got a bit of a different video for you again. So if you remember, I reviewed the Razer DeathAdder Essential a while back, and I called it a joke and I said the mouse was trash, and to be honest, I stand by most of what I said. I was fairly harsh, but overall the Razer DeathAdder Essential isn't a great mouse. If you can get it on sale really cheap, it's not too bad, but it isn't great. So in this video, what I've done is I've modified the mouse and it really is completely different. So I'm going to show you what I did and how I did it, and then at the end I'll talk about whether I think it was worth it and whether you should do this to your mouse. So guys, let's get into this. By the time you guys are watching this modification was done back in December. This whole thing was filmed a long time ago and I've just been so busy and not got around to it. But here you can see me unboxing the new DeathAdder Essential. I actually bought a new one to do this, and then the one I modify is actually the original one from my review, which was obviously quite a controversial one. So as you can see here, I'm just playing about with it, seeing that it does have the same pre-travel and post-travel. Overall, it is the same mouse. I didn't have a bad copy before. It's far from perfect. Something I do want to stress is that this is not really a tutorial. This was one of my first mice modifications ever, and particularly with the soldering, I did a really bad job. You'll see as we get there. What I'm doing here is I'm taking off the feet first to reveal the screw holes, and to make that easier, I've heated them up with a heat gun. If you're doing this yourself, a hairdryer will work just fine, but a heat gun is a really useful thing to have. So as you can see, I'm revealing two screws underneath the front feet, and then the other one is actually underneath the label, which I've melted a bit. It does take me a while to realise this. I'm trying to pry it open, thinking there's maybe only just two screws. It's quite stupid in hindsight, but you'll see in a minute. I do eventually find that extra screw, and then we can just pop the bottom off. It comes off nice and easily. One thing you do want to be careful of when you're taking the bottom of pretty much any mouse off is usually there's going to be some form of wire connecting to the shell of the mouse if there's any RGB or anything in the back. So just keep an eye out for that. On some mice it's absolutely fine, and on others there's just something you want to unplug. I was having a lot of trouble taking out that clip for the LED on the shell, so first I unplugged the main mouse cable, and then after that I actually found it easier to clip out the LED from the shell. Some of these clips and connectors are really fiddly and in quite tight, and you don't want to pull any wires out and break anything. Then I removed the screws holding the PCB and pulled out the PCB. However, what I didn't notice is that there's a little PCB with the LED on the scroll wheel above the scroll wheel, which you're going to want to carefully remove first before you pull the PCB off the bottom of the mouse. I didn't realise this and I snapped the PCB in half. You can see there. This isn't really a big issue. Everything's still going to work apart from obviously that LED on the scroll wheel. The next job was to remove the current switches in the mouse, and this went a bit wrong because as you can see with that first soldering iron getting way too hot, that was actually a US soldering iron adapted into a British plug, which rather than being 110 volts was therefore 240 volts, which was way too much, and it blew it up. So then I had a bit of trouble because this is a wood burning iron for some art or something. It's all I had to hand, and I really wanted to film this video at the time. So it was a bit tricky, doesn't get quite as hot, but eventually using that and a heat gun and a bit of patience and poor technique, I did manage to get the old switches out. I broke them in the process, but it worked. And then the new job was to solder the new Kale red switches in, which also didn't go too well. It was a bit tricky with this soldering iron, and my technique, not that you can see too on the video, was really poor. I'm fully aware of that, but ultimately I got them in. They both worked. The soldering wasn't pretty, so I'm not even going to tell you how I did it as such. It's not a tutorial, go look one up. But the switches worked, everything worked apart from obviously that bit I broke. The new cable, which is from Agile Cables I believe, clearly worked as well, so I was very happy with that. What you can see me showing here is on the old cable there is a stress relief, and what that means is if you pull the wire on the mouse just in normal use, that it's not going to pull it out on the internal plug. So that's what the aim here of this bit of plastic and this heat shrink is. You can actually buy 3D printed ones I believe with Agile cables, but I didn't opt for that version. This was cheaper and does the job if you ask me. So that kind of clips in there, you heat it up, forms into place, and as you can see when I pull the cable now on the outside of the mouse, it doesn't affect the inside, which means there should be no way that I can break the cable or unplug it. So here's me routing it in, and then I just also do the heat shrink on the other side. It's not really needed, that one, to be honest, but it's worth doing. But yeah, as you can see, the stress relief is working really well. Once I'd heated up that last bit of heat shrink like I mentioned, it was then back to screwing the mouse together and just putting it all together. Obviously as you go along I recommend checking everything works after each stage like I did, and therefore you know everything's going to work, and definitely give it a nice test before you put the feet on, because once they're on you may not be able to reuse them very nicely, so you definitely want to check everything's working fine, which in my case it would be. It was nice and simple, screwed it all back together, clipped everything in, basically all in reverse order, and then just give all the buttons a test, especially like the scroll wheel. Sometimes if it's not clipped in properly, I mean the shell of the mouse isn't clipped in properly, the scroll wheel could not work as well, but I got it all sorted. It did take a couple of tries. And then what you can see me here is installing the feet. So these are CorePads and they came with a alcohol prep wipe, most do, but basically you just want to get the surface perfectly clean and then stick the feet on and just do your best to get them lined up first time. I didn't do a too amazing job, but you see I did it in time, got it stuck on, it's nice and smooth, and then I'm just giving it some nice pressure, making sure it's in place, and it's nice and simple. I definitely recommend anybody can replace the feet. It's really not a difficult job. You don't need any extra tools or skills like you do to solder, and you can just stick them on. So I've done the back foot, here's the sensor ring, and then there's the 2 front feet to come as well. And once that's done, that's everything done, and that's the DeathAdder Essential mod, and I'll see you guys next when I'm seeing how it turned out. The difference really is night and day in my opinion. Obviously, instead of spending the money and time put on this mouse, it would have been better to just buy a more expensive mouse in the first place and then potentially upgrade that one. That being said, if you already have a Razer DeathAdder Essential or similar budget mouse or any mouse and you want to make some improvements to it, I definitely think it's worth it. For me, on the Razer DeathAdder Essential, the biggest upgrade was the paracord, since this stock cable on the DeathAdder Essential is really stiff. It's really annoying for me to game with. That being said, on other mice the cable isn't too bad, and the biggest upgrade would be the feet. CorePads, there's Tiger Arc, there's just basically any aftermarket feet you're going to get are probably going to be better than the stock feet on your mouse. And for the DeathAdder Essential, the feet weren't very good either, and it's just made a huge difference. Obviously, for my hand size and grip, the DeathAdder in general is just a little bit too big, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it feels like a completely different mouse. As for the clicks, it's probably the least significant upgrade I made. However, that being said, I really do like them. They feel so much better. The post and pre-travel is so much less. They sound a lot nicer. Obviously, that's not important. But just overall, the experience and the feel of this mouse, it just feels so much more high quality. Beforehand, you could really tell you'd only paid $30 or whatever you paid for it. It was really, you could tell it was a cheap mouse. Now it just feels like you've spent a little bit more on it. It was definitely good fun. I definitely recommend anybody who's got the time or the money to spare would upgrade their mouse, even if it's not essential. It just gives it a bit of customization, a bit of personalization, and it's not that hard to do. You can see even with my dodgy soldering iron and having not done it in ages, I can still change the switches and mess it up a bit and everything still works fine. And if you're not wanting to solder and do that, changing the feet is so easy, and even the cable, to be honest, it's just a couple of screws and plugging something in. Most people are going to have no problem doing that. It's really easy to do, and it, like I said, the Razer DeathAdder Essential, I'd consider a good mouse now. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and even consider subscribing to the channel. For your next video though, go have a look at my Razer DeathAdder Essential review and see whether you want to join the 1,500 people disliking it, or whether you agree with some of the things I said. If you want to look as cool as me, and I know you do, you can get yourself some merch at techify.co.uk/merch. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.